So, Nick, do you want to quickly, maybe briefly introduce yourself first before getting into your talk?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Nick Cuda. I'm a senior product designer at Intuit MailChimp. I've been here for a little over a year and 8 months now, and I've been fully remote since April of 2021, which I never thought that I would do um, because I love being in the office. And I'm starting to miss it, I will be honest. I'm curious how many of y'all are fully remote, or how many of you have like a hybrid, or if any of you are in the office full time. If I ask questions, you can just throw them in the chat. I'll read it sometimes. Um, nice. Fully remote. I'm fully remote. There's not even a Los Angeles office. The closest office to me is in Woodland Hills. And if anyone knows anything about Los Angeles, I'm on the west side and the Woodland Hills is in the valley. I will never go there. Too far. Awesome. But a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Utica, New York, where in my senior year of high school, I took a graphic design class. It was actually more of like a here's Photoshop, go wild type of thing. I'm actually going to turn off the camera just to save some space here. But yeah, so it was like, here's Photoshop, go wild. We did a lot of crazy things. I was just learning the software, right? Um, and I used to draw a ton when I was a kid. I was always like super creative. But this is really where I kind of fell in love with design as a whole. So that was senior year, right? Going into college, I knew I wanted to study graphic design. I just didn't know where I wanted to go. So I actually went to a community college near me called Mohawk Valley Community College for 2 years. They have a pretty good graphic design program, so I got my associate's degree there before transferring to Drexel University to get my bachelor's. Um, Drexel's in Philly, so I moved to Philly without really knowing anybody. That was super challenging, but it was definitely one of the best decisions of my life, I'd say, because of the doors that it opened. After graduating, I worked at a large company called EPAM as a visual designer, and I was able to work on projects for companies like Forrester, Sport Check for all my Canadian people, Canadian Tire as well, Penske, Thomson Reuters, and more. So a lot of really cool things there where I was able to travel to some really cool places like California. On my 3 year anniversary at EPAM, I actually left and I moved out to Los Angeles, where I've been ever since. And yeah, since I've been out here, I've worked in VFX, I've worked in electric vehicles, I've worked in clean energy, financial tech, and now email marketing, right? Um, so yeah, I can't really share a ton of the MailChimp work, but this is just some of it. I've had the opportunity to work on some pretty cool stuff. The first project I worked on was right over here on the left, called the customer input module. So in MailChimp, customers have the ability to. No, I'm not Canadian, but I was hoping that some people would recognize some of those brands. Um, yeah, so in MailChimp, customers have the ability to add their brand assets like their logos, their colors, fonts, even their brand personality through their brand kit. And then we have another tool that could create designs for them based on all of that information, or they can simply share the URL of their website and we'll scrape it for them and we'll be able to pull their brand colors, their fonts, and stuff like that. But anyway, my task for the customer input module was to prompt customers that haven't added their brand information to do so, whether they wanted to manually, automatically, or not at all, right? They don't need to do that. The second big project I worked on was in the reporting section of MailChimp, which, if you know anything about email marketing, reporting is probably the biggest and most important aspect of seeing how your work is doing, right? So we created a global email report that shows customers' performance of their emails over a longer period of time. I was responsible for this chart that you see here, which is called our multi-metric chart. As it shows, you guessed it, multiple metrics such as click rate, open rate. Down the road we can show revenue and stuff like that, which was really cool. But the coolest part about this work actually was the table below. I created this table in addition to the chart to show the information in a way that's a little easier to digest. And actually, when testing with customers, they preferred this. So that was an awesome feeling, as it wasn't like a part of the initial scope. And then the third biggest effort was I worked on Inbox, where customers can communicate with their customers one to one, right? So instead of mass marketing, think of like somebody responding to an email campaign or maybe reaching out for support. They can do that there. And then currently, I am tasked with a team that is responsible for improving zero states or empty states in our app, which is a really large effort because of how large the app is. So, just a quick question for the chat. Did anyone here study design before becoming a professional designer? Are there any boot camp students or grads in here? Has anyone totally switched careers? If so, I'm curious, like, what were you doing before? I've had calls with like people who were teachers before, people who were in other industries where they thought that, the design thinking process didn't really apply to them, but surprisingly, it did once they switched over. But just curious. Freelancing for 8 years, that's awesome. BFA in design, that's great. Not Lewis, that's great. Yeah, and then for those who didn't hear the last slide, I did study design, got my associate's and bachelor's degree. Switching right now from hospitality, been 10 years mixologist. Ooh, that's awesome. I love mixology. Absolutely love mixology. I think I actually like making cocktails more than I like drinking them. No design background. That's awesome. And then I'm also curious how long people have been designers. Some have already answered this, but just curious. Curious who's here, right? 5 years, nice. 8 years. I've been a designer for like 9 years, freelance and working at agencies and in company and stuff like that since 2020. Nice. Well, welcome everyone. Um, that's awesome. So let's get into it. Again, thank you all for being here. It means a lot. And this is how to measure the ROI of design. It's probably going to get a little meaty in the middle of the presentation and then it'll kind of taper off, right? But yeah, let's do it. So this is my brain trying to choose a design direction. We spend countless hours designing iterations of icons, components, features, pages, workflows, etc. And we're always looking for ways to improve on the last version, right? Hence this inevitable, like, infinite circle, right? But outside of the subjective opinions and the statement you get from your boss or a colleague or family member saying, I think this one just looks better. How do we know if one iteration is objectively better or more successful than another? The answer is benchmarking. We test it, right? That's the process of evaluating UX with metrics that gauge, relative performance. It can be for something as small as like tracking the progress of a feature or a product or service, or simply comparing a new design with an earlier design, right? So why should businesses care if the UX of their product is good or bad? To us, it may seem super obvious, but there are a lot of instances where you'll need to do some research and convince your stakeholders that investing in design is not just a visual decision. It can actually have a massive impact on the business. Because UX can indirectly affect other areas of the business, such as like sales, marketing, engineering, or support, as mentioned before, especially support. It's important for businesses to make investments in design. Now, especially at startups and smaller companies, some leaders may not fully understand the value and will take more convincing. Fortunately, UX and product design are becoming more of a well-known profession, making more people aware and more businesses invest, which is great. In a 2016 report from Forrester, and that's really old, but on average, for every dollar spent on UX, there was a 100x return, which is wild. And design leaders need a way to identify and measure that ROI, right? Because we need to propose this to other stakeholders. That report also found that companies that use good UX design practices converted around 400% more customers, improved willingness of customers to recommend by like 16%, and increased customer willingness to spend money by 14%. So as you can see, I know this is an old study, but those metrics are pretty impressive, and will definitely catch the attention of stakeholders. You've heard me mention ROI, and it is in the title of the talk, so let me share the definition. It is a performance measurement that's usually presented as a percentage. It calculates the direct return relating to an investment, hence the acronym ROI. It's calculated by subtracting your cost of investment from your gain from investment and then dividing that by the cost of investment. I'm not a math major, so I won't be getting into the actual numbers, but you get the idea. So first you'll have to choose what it is you want to measure, because without this you could be looking at too many metrics, the wrong metrics, or just like wrong information in general, right? So you want to focus on key metrics that best reflect the quality of the user experience that you're interested in evaluating. You need to look for metrics that translate to UX and organizational goals, right? UX isn't just about the user, it's not just about the business, it's about both. That said, before you determine the metrics you need to collect, you got to define the kind of context of your study, right? In other words, you need to decide what product you will focus on. Is it a website? Is it an app? Which user group you will target, and which tasks or features you want to measure. We do this a lot at MailChimp. Our design team is huge, and as mentioned, so is our product. So with so many pages and features, we have to be specific about what we're testing and who we're testing with to make sure that we get accurate results, whether they're in our favor or not, right? So you need to figure out top tasks that people are completing your product. And if you don't have them, you can start by, documenting most tasks that are in that product. So for example, if you have a smart speaker app, right, a possible task you could measure is how long it takes customers to set up that new speaker. If you're an e-commerce website, a task you can measure is if making a purchase with one click increases the amount of orders, thus increasing revenue, which is huge, right? And if you're a mobile banking website, you can measure how easy it is for customers to update their contact information. But those are all just like actual examples, right? So now that we've seen like examples of tasks, how can we measure them? At MailChimp specifically, some of the metrics we look for are feature engagement, like when prompted with a message, are people more likely to use that feature? Task completion time, like how long it takes them to do so. And time to upgrade is pretty important for us, right? Because we have a free version of the app. So how long it takes for someone with a free account to upgrade to a paid account. And there are just endless more metrics. We have entire teams that look at that stuff, which is pretty crazy. So something that I learned when actually looking into this more information for this talk is like Google has what's called the HEART framework, which provides a concise overview of different types of metrics that you may want to collect and track. The framework originated from them working with teams to create and track metrics for their products. They started to see patterns in the types of metrics that they were using and suggesting. So then they grouped them into a framework to be a little more memorable and usable by other teams, right? It's not always appropriate to use metrics from every category, but you'll see I'll go through them in the next few slides. But for example, like engagement may not be as meaningful in an enterprise context if users are expected to use the product as part of their work, right? In this case, a team may choose to focus more on like happiness or task success, but again, you'll see. So first, we'll start with happiness. This is used to describe metrics that are attitudinal in nature. These relate to subjective aspects of user experience like satisfaction, visual appeal, likelihood to recommend, and perceived ease of use, right? Um, so some of the example metrics here are all scores. They're rated by customers or users, right? The first of which is customer satisfaction, or CSAT. That's a score that indicates how satisfied a customer is with a product, transaction, or interaction, right? And this describes a numerical measure of customer satisfaction. The ease of use score is pretty popular too. I mean, I'm sure y'all may have seen one, two, or all of these everywhere. We're constantly being asked how things were, and we're being surveyed all the time, right? But ease of use is literally like how easy or difficult it was for someone to do something, whether it's finding a piece of information or completing a task, and so on. There's Net Promoter Score, or NPS. This measures customer experience and predicts business growth. It's a proven metric that's transformed the business world, honestly, and provides core measurement for customer experience management programs, which is really cool. The next part is engagement. Engagement is the user's level of involvement with a product. In the metrics context, the term is normally used to refer to behavioral proxies such as like frequency, intensity, or depth of interaction over some period of time. Examples might include the number of visits per user per week, the number of photos uploaded per user per day, and so on, right? Note that as an engagement metric, time on task should be high. A long time spent reading articles on newspapers, whereas an efficiency metric, on task should be low, right? That makes sense. So like fast to check out on an e-commerce site. In other words, like the same change, say longer time, could be either good or bad, depending on what type of use is measured, right? The third one is adoption. So adoption and retention metrics, these can be used to provide stronger insight into counts of the number of unique users in a given period. For example, like a 7-day active users, addressing the problem of distinguishing new users from existing users, and so on. But these track how many new users start using a product, right, during a given time, number of accounts created in the last 7 days, and so on and so on. And retention metrics track how many of the users from a given time period are still present sometime later, right? So like I was talking about in a MailChimp specific example, like when people create a free MailChimp account, right, how many of them are still on that active account 30, 60, 90 days later, right? How many of them have upgraded to a paid and stayed paid for 30, 60, 90 days, and so on. And the last part is task success. So this encompasses several traditional behavioral metrics of user experience, such as like efficiency, so that's time to complete a task, or effectiveness, the percent of tasks completed, and error rate, right? The rate at which tasks weren't completed. One way to measure these on a large scale is via remote usability or benchmarking study, where users can be assigned specific tasks, right? And you can see if they're successful, and if so, how long that took. And if they weren't successful, there you go. But yeah, so if we think about the examples that I showed earlier, let's see, the smart speaker app, right? Benchmarking, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. Benchmarking a user experience isn't about just tracking the metrics. It's also about demonstrating the value, right? So if we think about some possible metrics for the examples from before, for the smart speaker app, right, the task was to set up a new speaker. So some relevant metrics would be time on task, success rate, and maybe a single, like, how easy was this question, right? For the e-commerce website, metrics to measure one-click purchasing could be weekly sales with one click and feature adoption of one click. And then last but not least, for updating contact information on a mobile banking website, we could look at completion rate, errors on page, and the total numbers of support calls related to that task. Again, tying this back to MailChimp, if we make changes in the app, since we have so many customers, like a couple million, I think, that's a lot of people that will see that change, right? So a lot of the time we have to inform support before we do that so that they can get up to speed with what the change is and they can get educated on how that change is going to affect our customers. So next, you'll need to decide how you want to measure, right? Y'all are pretty familiar with, or you might be pretty familiar with, like the three methods that work well for UX benchmarking, which is quantitative usability testing, analytics, and survey data. Quantitative usability testing, participants perform, tasks in a system, and researchers collect metrics, again, such as time on task, success rate, and satisfaction. For analytics, this is like system usage data, such as abandonment rates or feature adoption. That's the stuff that's kind of usually gathered there. And then surveys, as I said before, y'all are definitely familiar with those to probably get like 10 or 15% off of a website. I know they get me. But users answer questions to report their behavior. So task ease, satisfaction ratings, net promoter scores are, all these metrics collected. Ideally, you can pair a survey with a behavioral observational method to get like a holistic view of the experience, which is nice. But some things to consider when it comes to determining the methodology that you want to use to collect are the time commitment that the research method requires, cost of a method, skill of the researchers involved, and the research tools that are available to you, right? Don't do something if you don't have the right skills or the right resources. I've worked at companies where our only option was to talk to users, which is my personal favorite because there were no research tools available. I've also worked at companies where we simply couldn't afford decent testing software, or we had to use like many different pieces of software just to do everything that, like, for example, usertesting.com can do. And then I've worked at companies where there are so many resources, it's hard to keep track. Like right now, I mean, Intuit and MailChimp are huge. So there are just endless resources, and we have, entire teams that do this. So now that you've determined which metrics to collect and how to collect them, it's time to gather like some baseline metrics, right? So if you have time, it's definitely important to be able to run like a pilot study first to collect an initial sample of data. Then you can run like a preliminary like synthesis on that data to make sure, your method is sound and that, data is starting to answer the questions that you have. Most likely, a pilot will make you revise your methodology, meaning that the initial data set could be discarded. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had to go back and edit a study or a research plan because I released it to a few users and they found like bugs and, discrepancies in questions and stuff like that, or I wasn't getting accurate answers to questions, so I had to reword things. It can be a very tedious process, but it's worth the investment, I think, to get sound results. You don't want to present findings to somebody and have them poke holes in everything, right? That would be a pretty bad feeling. I feel like you'd feel like you're wasted time, right? So in the example of the smart speaker app, oh, sorry. Keep in mind that one measurement of your site is not likely to be meaningful by itself, right? So even if you just started your benchmarking program and you don't have prior data to compare to, you can still make comparisons with competitors or the industry or like a goal that's determined by your stakeholders, right? So in this smart speaker app example, right, you could benchmark the experience of setting up your product versus setting up a competing product. To do so, you'll obviously like need that data on the competing product, right, and on your product. So the prior steps in the plan will have to take that into account. But that said, you could use analytics such as your methodology, or I'm sorry, you could use analytics as your methodology, since you won't have access to like competitors' analytics unless somehow you do, in which case that's great. Um, but comparing to the industry, you may have to access external statistics, right, pertaining to that specific field. And you may want to compare like your NPS to the average net promoter score for the industry as a whole. Um, but yeah, just some differences there. Um, so the next steps of benchmarking and kind of comparing your features here would be redesigning, right? This is probably one of the most fun parts. I love the UX research side of design because I think it's very concrete and it's easier to take that data and say when something is done or when something isn't, right? Um, but without a redesign, you won't be able to compare multiple versions of your product. So I really love taking that data and using it to kind of not really direct design decisions, but to inform design decisions. There's the term data driven design, which is thrown out a lot, but I actually prefer the term data informed design, where you're using the data, but you're also using your experience as a designer to kind of create a better solution. Um, so when redesigning, things to consider are, like definitely the 10 usability heuristics for UI design. I highly recommend y'all look these up. Um, so, I mean, like some of them are visibility of system status, right? If something is not working, you want your customers to know that it's not working. Uh, in which case, that could help tackle number 5, right? Error prevention. You don't want people to run into errors. You want to make sure that they can get through this, right? Um, Aesthetic and minimalist design. You don't want to be designing things and adding them in there just to add them. Um, and on the error front, right, helping users recognize, diagnose, that's a good error, and recover from those errors. But I won't go through all of these, but I think you should definitely look them up. Um, so now that you've gathered the last two data points, right, from your pilot study, and then you've reworked it and create another one. Diagnose sounds cooler as it does. It's time to interpret findings, right? So you shouldn't take your metrics at face value, since the sample used for your study is most likely much smaller than the entire population of your users. Like I said, I like data informed design more than I like data driven design. But for that reason, you'll need to use statistical methods to see whether any visible differences in your data are like real or they're due to random noise. Um, I'm a pretty big skeptic when I'm doing research. Sometimes I feel in some of my research plans that, people join usertesting.com to take surveys. They literally join to do that, right? So sometimes I'm skeptical and I make sure I'm aware if I think like people are telling us something just to appease us. You know what I mean? So we have to be very intentional around the wording of our questions, right? And sometimes we have to be very vague. Like some research studies, we remove like the MailChimp logo, which clearly it's still the product, but people who aren't customers won't know that. Um, but we want to make sure we remove, any bias or any opportunity for them to just like answer a question just to do it and try to make us happy when really what we want is the truth, how they really feel, right? Um, Talking to customers can be scary. Only, like a handful of them are scary. Only a handful of them might get angry and yell. But honestly, you get like the most candid feedback from them, right? Um, I made a LinkedIn post a while back because I was like synthesizing feedback from a survey that went out to like 4,000 people or something, and there were a lot of angry people. So I just said, like, on the other side of a survey is a human who needs to read all of that stuff, which I think is pretty funny, unless you're that human, in which case it can be very annoying. Nielsen Norman Group actually has a course on interpreting UX numbers. Y'all can look that up as well. That's what I use to source, a lot of this presentation and stuff from like UX Collective and other resources. So if y'all ever have any questions on this stuff, it's so easy to find information on this, whether it's like videos or articles or anything like that. But yeah, so calculating ROI, it's extremely beneficial, though the act of actually calculating the ROI is obviously not widely practiced by UX professionals, right? Um, Perhaps because, relating our UX metric to a KPI is often convincing enough. We don't really need to see the cost. But any case, if you struggle to prove like the impact of UX, say you work at a smaller company and it's harder to get like um, stakeholder support for design, calculating the ROI can be pretty persuasive. So again, like this is not something I ever do. I don't actually calculate the ROI. I do this research, but I don't do these numbers. We have entire research teams that we can utilize for more complicated experiments, which is amazing at MailChimp. And as product designers at MailChimp, again, we're still fortunate enough to run our own experiments. But however, since this talk is titled How to Measure ROI in Design, I thought I'd put this formula in there for you. I was an amazing C student in high school, especially in math. So I'll definitely leave this work to someone else, and they can do that. So in a wild but somewhat accurate oversimplification, UX design is about understanding business goals and user needs and making sure both parties are happy, right? Again, super generalization there. But empathy tends to make designers side with giving users what they want. But the balance there is essential. Lewis loves math. Lewis, you can do all my calculations then. Um, but yeah, like I was saying, like as designers, I think it's easier for us to side with customers than it is to side with businesses. However, that balance is huge. Businesses need to make money, right? So when in doubt, I mean, talk to customers. Um, Again, only some of them are angry and scary. But that's the most valuable sort of information, research, feedback that you're gonna get, um, yeah, this has been my TED Talk. Y'all can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Wow, thank you
Yeah,
so much. That was an
for
awesome
sure.
talk. I think your talk has made all of this a lot more clearer because I've read all sorts of articles about how to measure ROI, but yours makes the most amount of sense. That was very helpful. Um,
Awesome. I'm glad.
yeah, and for those that have any questions or comments, feel free to unmute. Um, some users have server mute, so I'll remove that for you, and you could feel free to use your mic to ask a question. If you just want to say thank you, that's also fine. We take compliments.
Yeah.
I think we did have a question earlier, or was it a remark? Let me just scroll up and look for it. Yeah, so I think Kilomano said, any thoughts on Passion.io? It's a software that helps you make your own app. They seem to have a grasp on a lot of aspects of what UX designers are going for, and I am not saying that this will lose its jobs, but I feel like it's a place for people to get a good enough app for small businesses. I'm not familiar with that application. Are you?
Same.
Same?
No, not at all. It sounds cool. You bring up a funny point, like you're not saying it'll lose us jobs. Um, I know that you're not, but thank you for reiterating. But like anytime a new tool comes out for designers that, makes it easier for other people to design, like Canva, or remember when InVision Studio came out, there is a tendency for a lot of designers, or maybe it's just people who write articles and want clicks, to be like, is it the end for design jobs? No, it's not. But that app sounds pretty cool. I'm curious if you're familiar with it or if you have any experience using it, Kelamano. But no, unfortunately, I do not have any experience with it.
Yeah, I guess thinking about that though, I mean, AI and machine learning is pretty like it's advancing pretty fast. So I wouldn't be surprised if like design jobs will become obsolete in the next 10 years. But I don't think it's going to happen like right away. Like I don't think a disruptive technology like that is just going to sweep in and just take away all of our jobs all at once. So I think that's
Yeah.
something to think positively about. Does anyone have any
Yeah.
questions for Nick as it pertains to return on investment? Okay, so Otter says, I enjoyed the talk, Nick. Appreciate hearing all the app examples and example metrics of each of your points.
Thank you. Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Um, actually, I have a question. I'm not sure if I actually thought this through or not, but um, when it came to learning about return on investment and then collecting all these UX metrics, what was the fastest way for you to learn? Was it just through the job, or did you have to take up like a part-time course from like Neil Nelson just to pick up on those skills?
Um, I think just naturally over the course of years of working, you get very familiar with it, right? But yeah, the faster, easier way probably would have been reading all of these articles, taking some courses and stuff specifically. But um, I started as a visual designer specifically, and I worked with UX designers and product managers, and all of the people who were working towards these KPIs and these metrics. So that's kind of how I got familiar with it. Um, but yeah, so like I did research for this talk, and like the Google's Heart framework I was not familiar with. I didn't know existed, but the metrics within the framework I was familiar with. Um, so I found that grouping to actually be pretty helpful. Actually, let me link. I think I have. There's like a yeah. So I got a lot of information from this actually. Hopefully I'll be able to see it. But this is like literally their abstract around the heart method. So they reference uh, things like user zoom. They reference a ton of Google Analytics work, and they also use specific examples to Google, which is super helpful. Um, but yeah,
Alrighty, thank you for that. I'll definitely share this in the library just so that more people can access this link. This is a really great resource. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, absolutely.
Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, we could always break early. If you would prefer to use text chat to ask your questions, feel free. Otherwise, you can unmute and just ask away.
I got one typing.
Yep, so Kilamano says thanks for the presentation.
Awesome.
And I'm just waiting for Otter to finish. Okay, and they say, just want to make sure I understand the T portion of heart correctly. This has more to do with task engagement for features and not for the organization's goals slash high level tasks, right?
No, yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with like the organization's tasks. That's more around task success, right? So time for a customer to complete a task. Yeah, that's not like goals or tasks of the company itself.
Okay. Seems like they understood. And they
Cool.
said thanks. Alrighty. So thanks again, guys, for being here and being a great audience. Just wanted to let you guys know we are accepting donations for the Collective Studio. We are doing this to help cover the cost of our server, our website, as well as to keep these webinars and workshops going so that you can access it for free. So if you want to contribute and show your appreciation for our speakers and everyone here in on the server, just check out this link that I'm going to post in the chat and give us a little donation. If you want to join us for other events, I think we have a Christmas party that's coming up. Yeah, our Christmas party's coming up in December, and we'll have another design sprint happening in January. So definitely, keep an eye on the announcements channel so that you could find that information. Other than that, I guess that's it for your talk. And thank you so much, Nick, for being here. For those of you who have missed part of the presentation, don't worry. We've recorded this session. We're gonna post it on our YouTube channel, and yeah, we'll let you know when it's all up. Thank you so much, and have a great day and have a great
Awesome.
weekend.
See you guys.
Peace.